What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to this week's episode of The Formula, where we break down and explore the elements of achievement in world-class performers. I'm your host, Trevor Carlson, and I hope you are having a lovely morning, day, or evening, whatever time of day you are listening to our show. So when I say that we break down the elements of achievement, I mean that I get the opportunity to interview and ask questions to some people from all over the world about their professional or personal success, really try to understand how they've gotten to where they are today, what types of things they've been through, how they've overcome specific obstacles, and how we can take some of that information and apply it to other scenarios in our own lives. So this week's guest is Stephanie Osborn. She's a retired rocket scientist turned writer who likes to mingle in science fiction and mystery. This actually was one of my personal favorite episodes to interview Stephanie. She's just a fascinating person in general. We really dive into what led her to become a rocket scientist in the civilian space program. We talk a little bit about Star Trek, and don't hold it against me that I might have not answered a couple of questions correctly. Even for a geek, I'm a little embarrassed of myself, but it was really interesting hearing how she got into that, what really drives her to learn and experience new things. She talks about being a polymath and what it is. You know, we discuss, we go all over the place. It's a really fascinating interview because she discusses, you know, what it's like to be a rocket scientist, how she got there, what advice she'd have for people who want to explore more while they're young, like see more of the world and have more experiences. It was an interesting interview for me because as she was sharing a lot of her experiences, I mean, I got a little emotional when she was talking about losing one of her friends. And I feel like that kind of affected me for the rest of the interview, so I apologize if I wasn't on point towards the end. But it was just such a moving interview for me, and I feel like that a lot of our listeners are going to really enjoy hearing her stories, and they'll definitely feel what she did when she discusses some of the stuff that she went through. So I really hope that you enjoy this interview as much as Stephanie and I did when we sat down and chatted. And I hope that you have a lot of good takeaways. Feel free to let me know if you learn anything fun or exciting or something you want to share. Otherwise, let's get this interview started with Stephanie Osborn. This week's guest on the Formula Podcast is Stephanie Osborn. Stephanie spent a lot of time working at the civilian space program where she was a payload flight planner. Since then, she's transitioned to becoming a writer. Stephanie, I'm really curious as to how and why you really got into working in the civilian space program.
Well, that was actually a childhood dream come true. When I was a kid, two things happened. One was there was this little TV series called Star Trek. Yeah, I was really small when that first came on the air, and I didn't really understand all the concepts, but I understood enough of them because I was kind of precocious. I understood enough of them that I thought it was a really cool concept. And while that was going down, this other thing occurred. And yes, I really am older than dirt, so it's okay. This other thing occurred that was very, very serious. The Apollo 1 fire. And, of course, it was all over the news, as you might expect. And it was really, really a dreadful thing. And it was our country's first big space disaster. It didn't occur in space, it occurred during a test on the pad, but it was still a space-oriented disaster. And so I watched this and I was like, wow, this little kid's saying, wow, these guys were willing to die in order to explore space. and that's where we are now. And then I looked at Star Trek and I said, and that's where they wanted to get us to. And I looked at the one, and I looked at the other, and I said, I want to help get us there. And that was the beginning of the dream. And I spent all of my school years, from elementary school all the way through graduate school, almost, I won't say everything, but almost everything that I did was geared towards progressing this dream of working in the space program, of helping to get us from Apollo 1 to the Enterprise, or something approximating it. And, we've still got a long ways to go, but I'm one person that can honestly say I fulfilled that very first childhood dream. And that's why I did it.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. I wonder, part of me is wondering how many people there are like you who saw Star Trek and wanted to do that.
A goodly chunk of the space program, dear. I mean, there's a reason why the shuttle tester was called Enterprise. It was no accident. That NASA had no problems. There were a lot of write-ins, please do this from the general population. But you'll notice NASA never complained. NASA never protested. NASA never really considered calling it anything else.
That's pretty awesome. I guess I didn't even think about the effects that Star Trek had on, that generation of engineers at NASA or people at NASA. But, thinking on it, it probably had a huge effect. It probably inspired a lot of people.
Well, realize also that Nichelle Nichols for many years was considered a NASA spokesperson.
No way.
Yeah, she was. And that was official. That wasn't, just some PR. She was a liaison to the general public.
And to clarify for the audience, Nichelle Nichols is
Lieutenant Uhura.
Yep, that's what I thought. I was pretty sure. I just want to make sure. I didn't realize that. That's really cool, though. And just a quick sidebar. I was going to say this at the beginning, but Stephanie is recovering from pneumonia. So, I appreciate you, Stephanie, taking the time to show up today as you're in your recovery process. It's been kind of a nasty winter. So
it is, and this flu that's going around is just dreadful stuff. I mean, I came down with the flu, and inside a week I had pneumonia. It just stay away from that stuff. You do not want it.
Yeah, bundle up when you go outside.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah. So tell me, so you saw Star Trek, you decided you wanted to work at NASA and help get us from Apollo 1 to the Starship Enterprise. Was there anything else about that process or the things that you saw happening that really drew you in? Was there something specifically where you were like, I want to do this because of X?
Well, I always had a scientific bent. I was reading science fiction, when I was too small to really quite understand what science fiction was. But that was the sort of fiction that tended to appeal to me. That and mysteries. So there was always a kind of an intellectual aspect to my reading. And in the absence of anything better to read, I'd grab a volume of the encyclopedia or the dictionary off my parents' bookshelves and start reading. I have always loved to learn. I tell my friends, the day I stop learning is the day you can dig that hole 6 feet in the ground. So, I read other stuff. Don't get me wrong. I was into comic books, all the way through till adulthood. I'll still read a good comic book. So, there's other stuff that I read, but the genres that appealed to me most were the genres that made me think and that made me reevaluate my personal paradigms, if you will. And so, it all just sort of came naturally to me. I wound up just maybe like 10 years back, it suddenly hit me. I'm a polymath, and that's a fancy modern term for Renaissance person, basically, what used to be called a Renaissance man or woman. I have graduate and undergraduate degrees in astronomy, physics, chemistry, and mathematics. I have graduate and undergraduate subspecialties in geology. I'm a licensed minister. I've been a reserve police officer. I've got a lot of stuff that I've done over the years. And I only realized about maybe 10 years ago or so that what I had inadvertently and subconsciously done was emulated my favorite character from Star Trek. Want to guess who?
I don't know the name of the character. Which one is it?
Spock.
That was my second guess. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. Now it turns out, NASA, the space program is really, really big on, taking, psychological testing. They want to know who and what you are so they can make sure they put you into the right hole. You don't want to fit the square peg into the round hole. Mm-hmm. So, that's kind of their notion. Well, it turns out that from a psychological profile perspective, who I really am is Kirk. What most people don't realize is the original main characters from the original Star Trek, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and to a lesser extent Scotty, were based on Jungian archetypes. And it turns out that personality-wise, the Jungian archetype that I best fit is sometimes known as the explorer, and that was Kirk. So while I went whole hog for all of the educational training in the sciences like Spock, my personality type is a little bit closer to Kirk. It's like, oh, here's a new thing, let's go find out. So there's, a lot of stuff there, but yeah, I have had a really kind of an interesting career. My parents raised me to believe that if there was something that I wanted to do and it was legal, that I should try. And there was no reason why, there's nothing stopping me from going out there and doing whatever I wanted to. And so I have.
Where do you think that came from, that, desire to try as many legal and ethical things as you could?
I think it arises from the same place that all of the scientific stuff comes from. It's curiosity. I just want to find out. I just want to see what I can do. I want to see how far I can go. See what I see along the way. I love to travel for that reason. It's like, ooh, new places. Let's explore. So yeah. Whenever I got sent on business trips, I'd always try to schedule like a weekend. It's like, okay, send me there for the week, but I'm not coming back until Sunday night because I'm going to spend the weekend exploring the area. If I could. I couldn't always, but yeah, if nothing else, after work I would be out exploring the area and going to see whatever I could find. So
yeah, that's one of my favorite things to do. Is like, I think some people that have traveled with me might find it a little irritating, but I'm like, well, I'm just going to wander around and see what I can find.
Mm-hmm.
If I find myself not finding anything that I find to be interesting, then I'll get out Google Maps and look around. But typically, if I know where like I might need to navigate to like the part of town where all the good stuff is.
Yeah.
But once I'm there, I'm like, all right, let's just check this place out and see what's going on. I think it's important to kind of allow yourself to get lost in new places too, so you can kind of find your way around.
Oh yeah, and it's fortunate I have a really excellent sense of direction. So I started doing all this stuff back in the days before GPS.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've gotten myself massively lost a couple of times, but it's really interesting that almost always only happens in a big city. If I get downtown, I will get turned around.
Yeah, everything starts to look the same too.
Yeah, it does. You can't see very far because of all the big buildings and yeah. But I mean, if you look at, if you go to my website and look at my bio, I've got a lot of interesting places that I've been.
Yeah, I saw
things that I've done, and all of those are because I had the opportunity to go exploring. I've literally set my hand in dinosaur footprints. I've walked through groves of giant sequoias. I've walked across the world's highest suspension bridge. I've been in gold mines, way down deep. I've clambered over, volcanic areas. I've been to the top of Pikes Peak. I was on Johnston Ridge, looking straight into the maw of Mount St. Helens while it was experiencing phreatic eruptions. So, and why? Because I was there. Not because it was there, because I was there. And I could, so I did. And, as far as the trip to St. Helens is concerned, had I am now handicapped, so that was in the beginning stages of developing the knee problems that led to my becoming handicapped. So it was difficult for me to hike over mountains, but I would have happily worked with the USGS and gone with them onto the slopes of the mountain itself, in order to help, set up or maintain some of the seismic equipment and stuff. Had I been physically able to at that point.
That sounds like a hell of an experience, really, like being up there when all that's going on.
Well, Johnston Ridge is where you're probably not old enough to remember the actual eruption. But if you've seen and heard the video footage, he's the geologist who radioed in, Vancouver, this is it. And he was close enough. He took the direct. I mean, he didn't survive it. He within seconds, according to the observatory rangers, the carrier signal from his radio went dead. He was a little over 4 miles from the volcano when it erupted, and in the direct line of the pyroclastic flow. So they named the ridge was not really named before that, but they named the ridge for him. So that gives you an idea of how far away I was from the caldera. I was about a little bit over 4 miles from the caldera, looking right into it. So
yeah, that's fascinating, and it's that you were there when something like that took place. That's crazy. I'm wondering, like, I'm sure you probably get a lot of questions from folks or have in the past about, how if they wanted to get started, like traveling or maybe becoming a polymath, where would you recommend that they get started?
Well, the first thing I would recommend is sit down and figure out the subjects that you're interested in, because those are the subjects that you are invariably going to be best in. You're going to have a hunger to investigate them. So those are the things that you should research. Don't be afraid to dig into a subject if it interests you. Get books, read them, go online. Google is your friend. Learn Google Fu. Learn to be a good researcher. Learn how to most effectively hunt up the information that you want to find. And that just takes practice. That's sitting down with your whatever. I joke about Google, okay? It's the one everybody's most familiar with. Whatever your preferred web browser is, sit down with it and play around and practice using the different search terms. And you'll find that certain ways of structuring it work better than others. If you put this word first instead of that word in your search string, it weights the relative words. And so you'll find as you practice, you'll find that you start to get more hits, more options to look at. So play with things like that. Don't be afraid to go someplace that you've never been before, to try something that you've never tried, to taste something that you've never tasted. Those are how you come to develop a very full, very rich life. And okay, yeah, I'm older than dirt, but there's nothing that I regret doing. So, and don't do a whole lot of might have beens. That's no good. It doesn't. You can't go back and change anything anyway, so why bother?
Yeah. If you had to recommend one thing for someone to try, what would it be?
Oh, gee.
I know. I'm hitting you with the deep question, hard questions now.
Try exploring. Try going someplace you've never been and seeing what you find. You'll be surprised. You may think that, there's nothing there interesting, but you'd be surprised what you can find once you get there.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite place or somewhere where you would recommend someone go?
Favorite places? No, not really. Me personally, and this is a little odd, I think. I actually recently wrote it into one of my books. I have always been pulled westward. Even as a kid, even as a child, my parents' house faced west. So I could sit on my front porch and watch the sunset. And there was always something about, particularly around that time of day, it was, the best I know how to describe it is, I wanted to chase the sunset. I wanted to follow it. And so I have always been interested in anything west of the Mississippi. I'm in Huntsville, Alabama. I grew up in Tennessee. I had a friend in elementary school. His mom was a teacher and his dad was a farmer. And they were comfortably off. And so one summer, they just took the summer, and this was in the days before the interstates were complete. They actually hit Route 66 and followed it all the way to California. So they spent the summer traveling. And he came back and he told me all the stuff he'd seen. And I have never had the time to do it. But to me, that is how one would spend a summer. That is my ideal summer. Is to just get in my car, hit the road, and head west and see what I find. However long it takes me to get to the West Coast is however long it takes me. But what can I find along the way? What cool stuff can I see? And that's something I have always wanted to do. So, yeah. And there's something to be said for not interstate, because interstates are designed for getting from point A to point B as fast and as directly as you can. So you miss a lot of stuff. And I'm sorry, but I swear most interstates were built with an eye towards taking you through the most boring countryside they could find. You know, you try. Florida is a cool state. There's so much to see, and yet you drive along I-10 through Florida, and all you see is dadgum pine trees for miles and miles and miles. There's nothing but concrete interstate and pine trees.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, no. So you know what I'm saying? It's like there's so much to see. Go see it. Don't say when, one of these days. Make one of these days today. Tomorrow. Don't put it off. Because if you keep putting it off, you'll never do it. I'm kind of sad that I've put off that spending a summer traveling west, because now I'm handicapped. It's going to be a lot harder for me to do it now, assuming that I actually can. So, yeah, I put that one off mostly because of work. But there were other things that work brought to me, so I can't complain too awfully much, I guess.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when you're sitting console for a shuttle mission, and you're helping to plan the experiments that the astronauts are doing, and you get to see stuff that humans have never seen before. So that kind of compensates a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I would say so, a little bit at least. So that I'm kind of curious, like I kind of want to hear like the most interesting story that you could like tell over dinner about your time working in the space program.
Okay. I just one, huh?
Well, if you've got a bunch of good ones.
I got a bunch of good ones. I figure one of these days I got to sit down and write all this stuff down, and make a book out of it. It's just that it seems so egotistical to me, because it would basically be a kind of autobiography, and to me, I mean, I don't know, that just seems a little egotistical to me. One of the most interesting things that I remember seeing occurred on one of the U.S. microgravity payloads. One of the things that I worked on was the mid-deck glove box. Glove box is it's a contained box that has portals built into the front of it with gauntlets, so that you can be on the outside of the box, but you can reach into it to do stuff to the stuff that's inside. And it's a way of containing whatever's inside for whatever reason. It might be because it's chemical. It might be because, hey, you're in a microgravity situation and you're going to be dealing with a lot of messy stuff, and you don't want the messy stuff floating around the cabin, you know. So it could be because it's a little bit dangerous, or it could be just because it's messy. You know, it's a means of containing what's inside and keeping it inside. Well, one of the experiments that was in the mid-deck glove box was a fire experiment. They wanted to see most of the behavior of fire that we're familiar with on Earth is is determined, surprisingly enough, by gravity. Gravity governs convection. And it's convection. You look at a candle flame. What shape is it? It's a teardrop, right?
Yep.
That teardrop is created because of convection. The hot air around the flame is rising, so it pulls the flame up into an elongated shape. Cooler air flows in around the bottom, around the actual candle, the wax part, and then it moves in to fill in the rising warm air, is itself heated and begins to rise. So the candle flame shape is determined by convection. In the absence of gravity, how does a flame behave? Nobody knew. Why is that important? Well, because one of the worst things that could possibly happen on a spacecraft would be a fire. We didn't know how fires would behave. We needed to know so we could start planning things like, how do you combat a fire in space? How do you detect a fire in space? Does smoke behave the same? Would smoke detectors even work? See, these were all questions we didn't know at the time. So the concept was we're going to take some stuff into space, put it in the glove box so it can't get out, and we're going to ignite it and see what it does. We're going to flow air. Some of it we're going to flow air through the glove box from right to left, and some of it we're not, and we'll see what happens. And so we learned a tremendous amount. It turns out that in the absence of the airflow of any sort, whether it's because there's a fan blowing through or because of convection due to gravity, flames tend to form balls. They're spherical. And they tend not to really move. They'll actually self-extinguish after a while if you don't keep feeding them fuel and oxygen, because there's nothing to bring in. There's no convection, so you're not bringing in fresh oxygen to keep it burning. So eventually it snuffs itself out because it's burned up all the oxygen in the immediate volume, and it'll extinguish. But one of the things that we did freaked everybody out, because what they did was they took a sheet of paper that had been specially treated with chemicals so that it would smolder but not break into an open flame. And so the means of igniting it was to take a hot incandescent bulb and ignite the bulb, wait for it to reach temperature, and then just touch the bulb. There was an automated arm that would come out and touch the bulb to the center of the piece of paper. And it was hot enough to ignite the paper, especially with the chemicals it was impregnated with. And so they ignited this smolder paper. And so you wound up with the center charred out. But then the edges of that circle were still alight. With what you could see little coals, little red hot coals. And they started burning, the little coals started burning out through the paper. And as they would move away, the one individual coal would bifurcate. It would split into two. And it was leaving behind this white paper, it was leaving behind a black trail. And so as it split into two, it looked like this demonic black worm with glowing red eyes. And then gradually the two individual coals would start to separate, and they'd curl away from each other, and then those would bifurcate, and then eventually those would separate and curl away from each other. And so it developed this lacy, this interwoven pattern of these black demonic worms with glowing red eyes. That's what one's imagination turned it into. And as this experiment ran, and it was slow enough that you could sit there and watch it, all of the communications loops grew silent. And all at once you hear the flight director, Capcom, flight, go flight. What is that? It's one of our flame experiments, flight. It's not alive? No, flight. It's inside the glove box, right? Yes, flight. Keep it there. The flight director. That's a slightly paraphrased, but that was the gist of the conversation. Was don't let that thing out. Whatever the thing is, keep it in there. But yeah, it was downright spooky looking. It looked alive. There wasn't a thing about it alive. It was just burning coals, behaving in a fashion that we'd never seen before. But yeah, it creeped everybody out. So that's probably one of my more interesting stories.
That's an intense story. That's really cool though.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that, we'd never seen that before. We'd never seen behavior like that before because it can't do that on Earth. So, you stick stuff in space and you get things unexpected sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm sure that we could probably talk all day about all the interesting stories that you have.
I've got tons of stories. Yes, I can talk a long time.
That's awesome. I'm fascinated to hear even more of them. But I also would like to, in the interview, I'd also like to cover some of your writing and
sure,
like how I'm wondering how you transitioned from doing all of this awesome stuff with the space program into becoming a writer.
It was easier than you might think in some regards. I've never, since learning to write, I've never not written stuff. I started off in early elementary school writing poetry. Some of it was a little weird because, little kid. But, I started off writing poetry in like second or third grade-ish. By the fourth grade, I had written a play. It was in retrospect, it was horribly derivative of the stuff that I was watching on TV at the time. But it was good enough that one of my teachers let me cast it, rehearse it, and produce it for the class. By the time I was in like 5th or 6th grade, I was writing short stories. In high school, I wrote and submitted a short story. It was a Sherlock Holmes pastiche to the high school literary magazine that was good enough that the English lit professor, the entries were blind judged, so they didn't know who wrote them. The English lit teacher read it and said, "No, somebody plagiarized Doyle. This is one of Doyle's actual stories." Without bothering to go down to the library and check. So they actually threw it out and wouldn't publish it. And at the end of the year, I was like, "Why did y'all do that to my story?" And she looked at me, and her jaw kind of went slack, and she said, "That was yours?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Oh my gosh, we thought it was plagiarized. If I'd known you wrote it, I would have known you wouldn't do something like that." Because I was a pretty straight-laced kid. So I got into the honors program in undergraduate school based partly on my writing skill. I've never not written. Since I knew how to make letters, I've always written. So in that regard, it wasn't that hard. The trick was getting myself published, and that wound up happening thanks to my husband introducing me to an established author. At the time, we all worked at the same company. And he was a New York Times best-selling author. So he took me under his wing. He's like, look, send me your first novel when you finish it, and I'll help you polish it, and then I'll function kind of loosely like an agent, and I'll see if I can get one of my publishers to publish it for you. And so the first book was Burnout, The Mystery of STS-281. And I had just finished it and put it into his hands when the Challenger disaster occurred.
Wow.
No, excuse me. That was the Columbia disaster occurred. I was using the Challenger disaster. It was about a space shuttle disaster that, in my fictional scenario, was sabotage. So I was using the Challenger disaster reports as part of my research. It was the Columbia disaster that occurred right after I put it into his hands. And because I looked at the Challenger disaster and I said, I don't want people thinking that I'm trying to profit off of a tragedy. I'm going to make my scenario different. Challenger occurred right after launch. I'm going to have mine occur during the entry phase. So I had a shuttle breakup over North America during its re-entry and approach to the Cape. And so Travis has the manuscript, reading it when Columbia breaks up as it's approaching the Cape over North America with a friend of mine on board, no less. Columbia and my fictional shuttle had the same orbital inclination. They had the same intended re-entry trajectory. They had the same intended approach to the Cape. They had the same overflown states. They had the same region of breakup. They had the same debris field area, except that mine extended off the Texas coast into the Gulf. And I had written it all before Columbia occurred. So Travis had his hands full at that point because I was so upset I was ready to trash the manuscript. He was like, no. It's good. We need to polish it. But it's a good story. You do not need to trash this. Don't let it get to you. And I'm like, but Travis, it happened. Because I don't care how logical a person you are, when you write something like that and then it occurs, there's a little voice in the back of your head that says, it happened because you wrote it. Your friend died because you wrote this. And he's like, no. I get where you're coming from, but you knew your stuff, Steph. You worked the program. You researched all this. It's just sheer horrible coincidence. And he's right, because, it took me a long time to get perspective on it. But what wound up happening was I decided where I wanted the breakup to occur. And then I backed up to determine what orbital elements I needed to have for the shuttle in order to make that trajectory logical. And once I'd done that, everything else was fixed. And so it just so happened that, the actual event occurred during a mission that had pretty much the same orbital elements. The shuttle was flying more or less the same orbit that I had established that I wanted. And I don't know, it took me a long time to deal with it.
Yeah.
I wound up when the accident investigation reports started to come out, I figured, okay, if I'm going to write this, I'm going to do it right. I'm gonna make sure everything's correct. So I started downloading the reports and reviewing them, and I discovered that I didn't have to change anything. I did enhance a few things based on those reports, but nothing that I had written was fundamentally incorrect or needed modifying. Nothing had to be corrected. So yeah, it was kind of interesting. I did dedicate the book to my friend Kalpana Chawla and the rest of the crew, because I felt that was the right thing to do.
Yeah. How and I'm asking this because I think there probably really isn't anybody else that's been through that exact situation, and I'm sorry that you went through that. But I think people go through tough stuff all the time. So how do you bounce back from something like that, or from a tragedy like that happening?
It's hard. It took me years to do it. See, I made friends. We called her KC. I made friends with KC when I helped train her for her very first shuttle mission. And then after that, when astronauts are all over the place, and their time is meticulously scheduled when they're traveling. So rarely, when she got up here from Houston to Huntsville, rarely was she able to break away. But if I was in Houston and she was in her office, I could usually manage to find, a lunch break, or after I'd finished a meeting or something or other like that, I'd pop over to the astronaut office and look her up, and we'd have a cup of coffee and sit around and catch up. And so it was hard. It took me a long time to polish that book because of that. But what wound up, I think the real thing that did it for me actually only happened a few years ago. I got invited, well, two things happened. One was I went back to my undergraduate university I was invited to come back to give a lecture and a book signing. And when I got there early to set up my display of books, there was a gentleman there that evidently they knew was coming. And he was there to see me specifically. And he got there early to see me. It turned out he was one of the 3 field coroners for the Columbia disaster. And he had been involved in recovering and examining the bodies of the crew. And in the course of things, he even had his personal copies of the reports, the coroner reports, and he let me flip through them. I'm not sure if he was supposed to let me do that or not, but he told me, he says, I've read the book. I've heard some of your interviews. I think you need some closure on this. So we talked a good bit, and it turned out that I didn't get all the answers that I wanted. I was kind of hoping that when the shuttle broke up, that the accelerated forces were sufficient that they would have knocked out the crew, if not outrightly killed them virtually instantly. And that may not have been the case. They may have been aware of what was happening. But at any rate, at least one crew member was found on the ground, body intact, cause of death, multiple blunt force traumas. And I looked at the guy, and I'm sure my eyes were like, dinner plate size. And I said, does that mean he died when he hit? And his reaction, he didn't give me a verbal reaction. What he did a combination of moves. The first thing he did was to shrug. And the second thing he did was to nod. What he was telling me, and I don't think he had words, but what he was telling me was, I wasn't there, we weren't there, we don't know, but if I had to guess, I'd say yes. And that registered on me. And then a few years later, I was at another book signing. There were several authors there, and we were in the lobby of a hotel. And this was during Felix Baumgartner's historic Jump from the Edge of Space. And so they had that on the big screen TV and to one side. And when he actually jumped, everybody just stopped what they were doing and just watched. I mean, there were not even the people coming to get their books signed. We were just all watching. And I'm sitting there going, dear Lord, please don't let me see what happened to Casey happen to this guy. And of course, we all know now it was successful, although it was a near thing. He did have a few little incidents there that almost took him out. But it was successful. And along about the same time, or a few months later, I was invited to attend an astronaut memorial service. Because most people don't realize, but the three major disasters in the American space program, the Apollo 1 fire, the Challenger disaster, and the Columbia disaster, all occurred within one calendar week. And we just came out of that calendar week. And it was a very emotional thing. And it was very difficult for me to get through, but I was one of the guest speakers, so get through it I had, and I had to talk about it. Well, all these events kind of merged in the months thereafter, and all at once I was like, I have an idea, but I'm not a materials science person, so I needed some help fleshing it out. And so I'm a member of Sigma, which is the science fiction think tank. It's a group of science fiction writers with technical backgrounds. And we do consulting work, upon request. I was nominated for membership by one luminary who has recently left us, named Jerry Purnell. And his colleague, Larry Niven, seconded his motion. Anyway, Dr. Arlen Andrews and Tom Ligon, Arlen is the founder of Sigma, and Tom is a fellow member, jumped on board with me in developing the concept, and we wound up with a preliminary patent for something called SPEARD, the Single-Person Emergency Atmospheric Reentry Device. Basically, we developed an astronaut escape pod. And that all came out of my having lost KC. And so that was kind of, it took a while, but and we're still developing it. We need some financial backers because we flat run out of the ability to be able to fund what needs to happen next ourselves, because we need to do some high-level testing and modeling. And for that, we need some serious computational equipment. But this whole SPEARD concept, if we can get it developed, manufactured, and implemented, then I have hopes that nobody will ever have to go through what KC went through ever again. And so that's my way of coming to terms with it. That's my way of dealing with it. Of making something good out of a horrible tragedy.
Yeah. I think if it's a tough story to hear, but I think if I could take away one lesson from it, it's to kind of, try to figure out what you can do to prevent whatever happened from happening again to other people, or being proactive in coming up with like a future solution to something.
Yes. Everybody has to deal with things in their own ways. So what I did might not work for other people, but I feel like if I had Casey to talk to her right now, she'd say, "Steph, you done good." You know, so.
Yeah. When you pull that off, I think that if it could potentially save lives, as you know, as we're starting to see some signs of hopefully another space race starting again soon. We'll see though, especially with that car getting launched into space yesterday.
Oh, wasn't that cool to watch? Wasn't that cool to watch?
That was cool.
I used to very few were the missions that I was not sitting console during launch. And there's an adrenaline rush that comes for that like no other. And I think the only thing that would top it would be actually being on the bird for launch. But yesterday watching that was a very close second to actually sitting console for a launch. So I was very excited. I did not yell. That's not, I've trained myself not to do, the most I'll do is fist punch the air and go, yes. Because you don't do that on console. You don't whoop and holler on console. You just don't. I mean, yeah, okay, fine. When you set the limb down on the moon, sure, whoop and holler. That's good. But we were trained to be very, very professional, and that kicks in when I'm watching it, because if I'm watching it on my computer screen, it's not unlike when I was sitting console and watching it on my computer screen in the control center or on the big screen directly in front of me. So it triggers the same reactions. But I got to admit, I started doing a whole lot more fist punches when I was watching the booster rockets come back into land.
Oh yeah, that was cool.
Oh yeah, I watched the split screens as they came down, and it was like, oh yeah, there's the Florida coast. Ooh, here we're coming up on the Cape. Okay, here we go. And I've got enough of enough experience that I knew by watching those two shots down at the ground from altitude, I knew when to start watching it was the quad screen. So okay, at this point, okay, now I gotta look up here and I watch the booster fire. There it goes. All right. 10, 9, 8, 7, and I started, mentally counting down. Okay, now I switch to the ground-based landing pad shot, and here it comes in from the top. Mm-hmm. So I kind of had the whole mental timing thing there was clicking for me, and so I knew where to look when. So it was just really, really cool. And I got a speck of dust in my eye. I'll admit it. That was pretty cool. I'm sad. It turns out that the core booster failed on landing. The only of the 3 engines that were supposed to fire, retro fire to slow it down, only one fired. So basically, it hit the water at 300 miles an hour and did not survive. But that the 2 boosters, the SIMO landing of those boosters, that was a wonder to behold. That was fantastic. So even if the central booster didn't survive, I still think they did an excellent job. And you know what? It's doggone hard. Talk to anybody who's ever had to land a plane on an aircraft carrier, okay? That's a hard landing to pull off.
I can only imagine. I've never had the opportunity to land anything. Probably better for everyone that way, but I imagine it's not easy.
Yeah, and you know, the landing, the ocean landing pad thing that they've got, it's moving, and that's the reason why it's hard to land on an aircraft carrier. It's moving. It's going up and down and side to side, and it's bucking around with the waves. The landing pad's going to be doing the same thing. So hey, you know, I the fact that they've been able to do it at all, hey, that's good.
Yeah. Well, I would love to keep talking about all of this stuff, but I know you want to talk about your new book. So tell me,
Yes.
Stephanie, tell me about your new book that just came out.
Okay, well, it is the 5th book in an ongoing series. The series is called Division 1, and it's my take on the urban legend of those guys in the dark suits that show up at the UFO encounters and the alien abductions and stuff like that, make the evidence go away. Except I go a little bit, I mean, everybody's used it from the eponymous Men in Black movies to, you know, the Matrix films. The Matrix agents were Men in Black. The X-Files, the Outer Limits, all these guys have used that urban legend because that urban legend's been around decades. But I use it in a little bit different way because my take on it is that it is the law enforcement branch of a galactic government. And so we're introduced to this galactic coalition, this galactic civilization, through the eyes of an astronaut who inadvertently gets co-opted into it when she happens to be at the wrong place at the wrong time and winds up in the middle of what amounts to an extraterrestrial wetback retrieval. And so the first book in the series, it's called the Division 1 series, and that's because Earth is in the precinct, the galactic precinct known as Division 1. The first book in the series is called Alpha and Omega, and it introduces you to our characters and the situation and the organization and the fact that there is a galactic government, which most people are not even aware of in this world. The 5th book out is the one that just came out. It's called Trojan Horse, and Dr. McAllister is now Agent Omega, and she has been trained and partnered with experienced Agent Echo, and so we've seen her growth as an agent throughout the previous 4 books of the series. But she has yet, the Echo has not been able to manage to get her off planet yet. He hasn't been able to manage an off-world mission for her. Astronaut though she be, much though she wants to get out there, this is the first opportunity she's had. And so he manages to wangle it, and after they complete their mission, which in and of itself is kind of a little adventure, he says, okay, we're going to get you properly certified on everything to do with flying a spaceship. And we're going to get you certified as a pilot. I'm going to ensure you know how to do EVA repairs, the whole bit. We're going to go, this is going to be one big training session. And hijinks ensue. Most notably when they wind up, when an alien spaceship from a satellite galaxy of the Milky Way comes after them and intends to capture them. It turns out that there's you find out in the previous book, there's an entire race known as the Cortians, who are basically nothing more than interstellar pirates and slavers. That is how their world works. And they have their eye on Echo and Omega as prime acquisitions. And so they come after him. And the dogfight does not go well for either side. The Cordian spacecraft is destroyed, but the Trojan Horse, the spacecraft that Echo and Omega are in, is also severely damaged and winds up crashing on a protoplanet in the Orion Nebula. And so it's all about how they are trying, they're banged up, they're injured, they're trying to survive in this slowly dying wreckage on a hostile world, while their colleagues from Division 1 try to find them and rescue them at the same time that more ships from Quarta are swarming through the nebula looking for them to take them captive.
Yeah, that sounds like I'm trying to imagine how all of that is going down, and I imagine that the other 4 books in the series probably do a really good job of like laying out the plot and the storyline and all that. But it sounds, I can definitely I can definitely see your background in working in the space program having like a tiny bit of an influence onto your science fiction writing.
We tad bit,
just a little bit.
Yeah, well, with backgrounds in multiple sciences like I've got, it actually comes in handy for writing this kind of book, because either it's something that I already know about, or it's something that I know where to go look to find out the information I need. So yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with this series. I'm writing it. I had the idea. The original story ideas came to me a couple decades back, but it was before I was well before I was a published author, and I didn't really have anything to do with them. I didn't have anywhere I could take them. I didn't have anything, so I just shelved them. And then a couple years ago, a friend of mine said, "Well, Steph, have you got it? You should start doing something like this." And I said, "Wait a minute. I wrote that. Granted, they're short stories, but I wrote some stories like that years ago. Well, can you find them and turn them into books? Well, maybe." And so to give you some idea of how long ago this was, they were stored on floppy drives, floppy disks. So the first thing I had to do was I had to find them. Second thing I had to do is I had to find, it turns out that for people that archive stuff, you can still get floppy drives that plug into USB ports. So I had to get hold of borrow one of those, so that I could actually retrieve the files off of the disks. And so I finally managed that. And like I said, they're really only short stories. But the core of the plot was there, and it was like, oh well, we need to have this in there, and they need to be able to do that, and by the time I'm done, they're books. So, so it's been a lot of fun to do. I have matured a lot as a writer since I wrote those. So the first thing I have to do whenever I go in there, is get over the cringe reaction, because oh my gosh, this is crude writing compared to what I do now. So then the second thing I have to do is to tidy up the writing and pretty it up and get it to where it's actually, I consider it halfway decent writing. And then I have to start expanding on it and adding in those details and stuff that make it interesting and bring out the characterizations and plot complications, add in plot complications and stuff like that. And I'm having a good time with it. And from what I'm being told, my readers are too. So
that's an important part, as long as your readers are enjoying it.
Well, I'm writing it. I have a distinctly inconvenient sense of humor sometimes. I cannot tell you the number of NASA meetings that I sat through biting my tongue or the inside of my cheek or my lip or whatever to keep from laughing because somebody said something that hit me just so, and I want to burst out laughing. So I'm writing these, I tell people, I'm writing these with my tongue planted so firmly into my cheek that it's poking out the side of my face. To give you an example, the second book is entitled A Small Medium at Large.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay, fine. So, yeah, I write them with a sense of humor. My characters, they're not serious all the time. They have senses of humor themselves. They tease each other. They pick each other. They joke. They play pranks on each other. They get into situations that they don't expect, and it's very, very deliberate on my part to set them in situations that are just absolutely hilariously funny. Sometimes it's deadly serious, and other times you're just laughing your head off. Like here is Agent Echo, who is this cool, calm Mr. Badass, a sophisticated, knowledgeable agent, unflappable, and it turns out that he's not used to dealing with kids. So when one of their expeditions to get information takes them to a toy store because somebody is looking at exposing the existence of the agency, and they've actually put out toys based on the agents. So there's like the little action figures of the agents, including Echo, and it looks like Echo.
That's awesome.
And the kids are like, "Oh, Agent 5, go get him!" And so he winds up running through the toy store, chased by this herd of kids, and he winds up literally he runs in behind a display, and he literally climbs up to the top of the shelving, and he lays there on top because the kids are down there. They don't think to look up, so he's up on top of the shelves, hoping nobody looks up and spots him. After being chased through the toy store here's Mr. Badass being chased by a herd of kids running like, an alien beastie is on his tail. So yes, I have fun with this. But sometimes it gets really, really serious.
Yeah.
Sometimes they almost get killed. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun.
I'll have to dive into some of them. I mean, you've kind of sold me on checking them out, so I'm definitely going to have to do that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I hope you.
I'll let you know after I read them. I'll be like, hey, I really like this. This is cool. Or I'll share my thoughts after I check them out. I'm sure they're gonna be entertaining though.
I just finished book 8 in the series and sent it to the beta readers.
Nice.
So yes, this is going to be an ongoing series. It's going to go for a little while.
Cool. I'm excited to have the opportunity to check them out. Now, I'd love to keep going on all these different topics, but I kind of have to transition us to the next part of the interview.
Okay.
I ran these questions by you earlier, but the first one is what do you try to do on a daily basis to really give yourself up, tongue tied, give yourself a leg up on the day?
The first thing I do is I'm not a morning person at all. I'm a night owl, so I'm kind of slow getting a jump start on my day. But the first thing I do is generally I get online, I check my email, I check my social media, I make any replies that need doing, and then when I get ready to write, I sit down and I open up the file and I actually scroll back to a couple pages before what I wrote the day before. The reason for that is that way I can make sure that it flows and it transitions well, and you don't see any sort of a break point there from day to day. And so I read everything that I wrote the day before, and I edit as I go. If I see anything I don't like that word, or ooh, I used that word twice, I fix that stuff. And then by the time I get to the end of that, my thoughts are back in the flow of the story, and I can pick up where I left off and keep writing. So that's kind of my daily routine, if you will.
Yeah, I like that. I like the whole going back over and reviewing everything. It kind of paints a little bit of a picture of, I think there's a lot of people out there that aspire to write, and they might not know what that looks like. So I think that kind of gives them a bit of an idea of when they sit down, what they can expect, or what they maybe quote unquote should be doing. So next question I have for you. What do you think the most impactful book that you've read has been?
Oy. I don't think there is just one. I've been influenced by a lot of books and a lot of authors and a lot of TV and movie stuff. People accuse me of writing very cinematically, and it's because when I write, I'm basically seeing it in my head like it was a movie, and then just writing down what I see and hear and feel and whatever. So geez, I don't know. There's really no one book that I can point to and say, this is the reason why I write the way I do, or this is the reason why I do what I do. I guess to go back to our very first, your very first question to me, probably the most influential thing was not a book; it was a TV series, Star Trek.
Star Trek. That's an awesome answer to that question. If somebody would have asked me before if I thought I would hear that, I would have been like, no, but it totally makes sense.
Well, it's what it and the Apollo 1 disaster were what started the whole journey for me. So if it weren't for that, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I wouldn't have done anything that I've done.
Yeah. Well, you've definitely, I think that was definitely a good investment of your time based on the interesting things that have taken place across your life. So the last question and a half that I have for you is what message would you like to leave the audience with today?
Don't be afraid to try new things. Do what you love. Do it with passion. Do it to the best of your ability. And don't be afraid to reach out into the unknown.
Well, that answer kind of like encompasses our entire conversation so far. And the last half question that I have for you is, if somebody wanted to find your books, where would they do so?
Oh, well, you can find pretty much everything I've got on Amazon, either in ebook or print or both. A lot of it is available for Nook also. I'm trying to ensure that everything that's available for Kindle is also available for Nook. Or you can just go, if you don't know what you want, you can always go to my website, www.stephanie-osborn.com, and that's Osborn spelled Osborn. People try to stick an E on it or a U in it or whatever, but it doesn't have any of that. It's just very basic,
Yeah.
So I've got purchase links for all of my books there, and you can choose what format you want.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrap for this week's show. Thank you for taking the time tuning into this episode. I really enjoyed sitting down with Stephanie. Big thank you to her for taking the time to chat with me. Any of the stuff that we talked about, any of the links, go ahead and check those out in the show notes, and you'll be able to find access to, if you want to check out any of her books or anything else that we discussed, some of her favorite books. So yeah, check out the show notes and you'll be able to find them there. Now, on another note, if you think you would like or you would enjoy hearing more podcast episodes, blog posts, sometimes ramblings in the form of emails, go ahead and head over to helixacademy.co. Now, we've also launched some of our first initial courses. The first one is free. It is the Formula to Conquering Your Week, which is basically just a 4-week email course on how to make sure you are designing your weeks in the best way possible, specifically for you. How to make sure you're taking the time that you need to do the things that you love or the things that bring you joy. Now, our other 2 courses that are available are the How to Pitch to Win course by Matthew Rhoda. Matthew is the CEO of SwineTech and has won over $400,000 in global pitch competitions while pitching his startup, and also raised over $1 million in venture capital. Now, our other course is by Drew Curtis. It is the Online Communities Masterclass. Now, Drew is the founder of Fark.com, and he's been running Fark for almost 20 years. It's been one of the longest running and largest online communities. So in that course, he shares his advice or formula on how he has been able to build, grow, and maintain Fark for as long as he has. So they're both awesome courses. There's a lot to gain there if those are areas that you would find interesting. Now, that is all for this week's show. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Trevor Carlson, and I look forward to you tuning in next time. This episode of The Formula was produced by Helix Academy, and the music was provided by the artist known as Moods. Make sure and check him out on Facebook or Spotify. That's MOODS.